Hello everyone, comics readers, comic fans, comic amateurs, friends of Stripburger, friends of Ljubljana, and everyone else, if there's anyone defined in another category. This is the opening event for the conference for Remix Comix, Comics for Heritage. I'm your host today. My name is Guido van Hengel. I'm from the Netherlands. And I'm a historian and writer based in The Hague, but I'm also exploring different types of storytelling, and that's how I ended up in the comics world. I will basically host and moderate the conference, and I will introduce speakers, and I also will explain a little bit about the Remix Comix project that this conference is a part of. I have 3 questions that I will answer. The first is why Remix Comix? Second is why comics and community, and the third question is why Paul Gravett. But before I will answer those questions, I would like to give the word to Katarina Mirovic. She is one of the founding mothers, I would say, of Stripburger, and she's the one who also brought us here together, and I'm very thankful for that. But besides that, she's also one of the original squatters of Metelkowa, and Metelkowa plays an important role in the residency of Remix Comix in Ljubljana, and she will tell a little bit more about that from her personal experience, but also as a curator of the residency today in this month in Ljubljana. So please give an applause. Where is Katarina? Where is she? Oh, here she is. Yes.
Thank you. So now you finally know who I am. And this is a project that has been organized by 6 associations from Serbia, Holland, Slovenia, and more Serbia and Czech Republic. So lots of Serbians, and there are even some present here, and you will meet them in next days also. And of course I would like to thank also to our local co-producers, which is ZRC Sazu, that gave us the place, and people from Metelkova's association Kud Mreža from Metelkova, with which we also produced a video about Metelkova, documentary. And so, what is it about Remix Comix point? The point is that we wanted to do this conference since years ago when we started with Stripburger, and that's now already over 30 years ago. We were whispering about comics in toilets, basically. And this is the first international comics conference in Slovenia where we can loudly speak and exchange also ideas and knowledge about comics with other professionals, artists, and also readers of comics. There are still not so many, and still comics are not equally treated as other art fields, but we are getting better and we are getting where we want to be. And one of the points of the project Remix Comix is to find connections and the relations between comics and community. Basically, focus is about marginal groups and heritage. So our focus, we chosen our focus in Ljubljana to be Autonomous Culture Center Metelkova, for simple reason that Autonomous Culture Center Metelkova city, it's joining several different kinds of people or in associations doing alternative kinds of art or contemporary art, and also activists that are covering different fields of social activism, let's say. So it's a place where also different kinds of people people that don't go to normal jobs, that don't have normal relationships, can go to, and can maybe find the new world, and can maybe make a new world, make a new social relations, new world with different social relations. And so we invited artists to work on Metelkova, on residences. Here we see Boris Stanic from Pančevo, Jos and Niven from Netherlands. They will do tomorrow performance. Mazen Kerbay from Lebanon and currently Berlin. He's doing a new comic story on the wall of Metelkova. And Teresia, I'm missing Teresia, the Czech artist which did amazing work on the wall of Metelkova. And they're all stories except Mazen's are based on Metelkova. Metelkova was the inspiration for their work. And besides the comic artists, there are also two artists from Novi Sad, so more Serbians, which did a great 2D piece, which incorporates also an emblem, a logotype of Metelkova, which is a rat fighting together with the dragon. And the dragon is a symbol of Ljubljana and also symbol of power. So all the autonomous culture centers or autonomous centers in general have continuously fight with surroundings, with existing rules. And that's how it's also always with Metelkova, that we always have to fight for our own existence. Nevertheless, of the references we got in 30 years of existence, this year it's a 30th anniversary of Metelkova. And okay, so basically our focus is on Metelkova, and we invite you all tomorrow to the great opening. You will see, besides of Remix Comics project, there will be also very interesting exhibitions by Le Denekri, French collective that we had luck to see before in Ljubljana, but that was quite a while ago. And then we have also Vasya Lebaric with his project Vasiona in next door, who will also exhibit his own stuff and do music performance. And of course, Jos and Niven with their own performance on the beginning of the happening. And what I wanted to say that after this lecture, there will be opening of this exhibition. And on this exhibition, you partly see it's a pop-up exhibition. It's not a masterpiece, but you will see the artworks by artists that are also present here and will take a part in the conference. And partly it's an exhibition of works that we have done as a result of workshops we did with elderly people. We are proud to say that our oldest participant was 94 years old. She didn't manage to make more than one drawing, so it's not really a comic, but it's a good start, we think. And we have also kids from socially, how would say, not deprivileged, but socially challenged kids, which did quite well job. And the winner is definitely Home for Elderly People, not the Home for Elderly People, but the Center for Activity Fujine, which managed to do lots of great comics. So, thank you. See you later.
Go up again. Thank you, Katrina. I said 3 questions. Some of the questions have already been answered. Remix Comix started last year in Novi Sad, and it's a consortium of 6 organizations from different countries. I will just mention them briefly. From Novi Sad, we have a LED Art collective. We have the European Capital of Culture. From Pančevo, Komunikart. Both, they're all Serbian organizations, both three of them. Zid Theater from Amsterdam. Luster Festival from Prague. And Forum Ljubljana from Ljubljana, obviously. The idea of Remix Comix is also to remix comics. That's the name of the project. But we also try to take comics as a tool to convey a certain message, but also to develop change in society. And the subtitle is, as you can see, Comics for Heritage. And heritage, we always think about like the European heritage, and then we go back into all kind of history and memory and the famous stories that were told by the power holders. But our idea is also that we can kind of dig deeper or dig somewhere else into other heritage stories, and that we can bring them to the fore and to share this kind of heritage stories of other communities that have not been included in the more power-focused heritage stories of Europe. So that's how we ended up also with the focus on marginalized groups. And in the previous residencies in the different cities that I just mentioned, there was a focus on several marginal groups, and these marginal groups worked together with artists. Sometimes they were even also engaged and involved in the artistic piece to share stories, tell stories, but also echo stories and find new ways to tell these stories in visual storytelling, but also even in performances and in text. In Novi Sad, the artists worked with the local Roma community, and they made an installation of comics and sculptures in the public space. In Prague, there was a very interesting interaction with young adolescents leaving foster care, somehow lost in between generations those stories were shared, and this led also to a mural, which is very beautiful in Prague. And a website that also shows the stories, but also gives the opportunity for people to engage, to help these people, the young adolescents stuck between foster care and the wider world. In Pančevo, which is actually currently taking place and that will soon be presented, there was a collaboration with elderly people from the elderly home, and here in Ljubljana, well, this is already explained by Katarina, it's Metelka, more as a lens through which we can look at public space and how marginalized groups can participate in local society, but also the wider society. So that's why Remix Comics and Community is the focus of our conference today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow. But we would like to start first with the power of comics. Power of comics, how to tell stories and how to make them work for readers, and not only the original comics readers, but also the wider audience. And this brings me to the third question, why Paul Gravett? Because we are tremendously happy that he's with us, because we believe that he is a walking encyclopedia of comics. So he's the ultimate person to tell us more about some hidden stories of the comics, the global comics history, some parts of the stories, comic stories have been overlooked, and how these comic stories can help us to look for new versions of heritage and new parts of heritage, whether this is European, local, or global. I said walking encyclopedia. Well, Paul Gravett has been on the comic scene for more than 40 years. He's London-based, but that doesn't mean much, because he pops up everywhere where you have exciting comics. You will see him in festivals all over the place. And I think you're also traveling now, going to Poland, and then yes, and he's really an explorer of comics, like a Flying Dutchman, or everywhere popping up for comics. He edited the book 1001 Comics You Must Read Before You Die, which is a canon anthology that you must read before you die. And he wrote books about Japanese comics, graphic novels, great British comics, and he was a curator of exhibitions, retrospectives of Charles Schulz and Tove Janssons, and he worked for British Library, Centre Pompidou, and many other galleries and cultural and artistic institutions. He last but not least, was also the founder of Escape magazine, which is an example for many small press or big press, even comics magazines that have been published in the last few decades in Europe. And also, I think it's nice to have you here also, because this is a Stripburger related event, so it's also very much about the future of paper, comics on paper and comics in zines. So I'm very much looking forward to your talk. The talk is a lecture. That means, well, Paul Gravett is talking, but you can all collect your questions, and then afterwards we will have a Q&A with Paul Gravett about the lecture or about any other subject related to comics and community or remix comics. So please give an applause for Paul Gravett.
Great, and we're off. Good, right. Hello, right, nice to be here. And yeah, Flying Dutchman, Flying Englishman, I don't know quite what, but the comics medium is the message. That's my title, which is based partly on Marshall McLuhan's phrase, the medium is the message. I think the point is that this title is that comics are great at getting across messages, but those messages may not always be the ones you think, and there may not always be the most positive messages. There's a fine line between comics that convey important, useful, life-enhancing information, and, as we know, comics being used also for propaganda purposes. And we need to be alert to the fact that those two versions of comics can appear. I want to show you, though, something that's pre-print, but still definitely tactile and not digital. I'm not opposed to digital, but there's no doubt about it that we're in an era now where attention spans are very short, but thanks to social media and smartphones. This is a kavad, and kavad come from Rajasthan. This is a patra painted scroll. These are two forms of traditional Indian narrative art. In this case, by the way, the scroll, just to explain briefly how this works, in fact, and both of them work, there are no words combined into these scrolls, all the kavads, I'll be showing you again in a moment, because they are performative. The idea is you have a live narrator, storyteller, who brings the story to life. The scroll is unfolded exactly like a web comic, actually, the way we keep scrolling one image at a time. And the kavad format is like a little box, which is mobile. It literally is a mobile shrine. If you can't go to the temple will come to you. And the doors open, and they keep opening. And then in the very middle, that center bit will open up and reveal usually a god and goddess, for example, or the end of the story. Now, this format is, as I say, still alive. It's been around for a long time, over 500 years. There are still performers who on the streets of India, and they are also brought into homes for special occasions. And just briefly about this is that they are brought in because the family invites these storytellers in to then incorporate into the story their own family members and their own genealogy, their ancestors. So the ancestors come into the home through these kavads. And this is both of these ones, the ones I've shown you, have been commissioned for an exhibition, the Mangasia exhibition. This is a very modern one where the form is still being used, but now to educate particularly women into how to set up their own business with a micro loan, microfinance. They can buy a cow, they can buy something else that can set them up in business. And so this is not just telling traditional stories, it actually is an active and contemporary educational form for telling stories. In contrast, I'm taking you back to World War II to look at some of the early superhero comics. You're familiar with characters like Captain America, which are, of course, overtly political. The first issue of Captain America had the superhero literally knocking out Hitler on the front cover. But what you may not be aware of is that the American government used comic books directly during the Second World War and actually directed particular stories and contents. This is an example of a story where, as you can see from the title, it's called This Is Our Enemy. And here it shows the four horsemen of the apocalypse carrying a Nazi banner. And this was put together on the recommendations and guidance of a thing called the Writers' War Board, the WWB, headed by Rex Stout, the famous novelist. And this group was a quasi-governmental organization. There were quite a few of these things around in the Second World War and since during the Cold War, where America used comics as a vehicle. And what they felt is, as you see here, is that comics, with their broad popularity, comprehensibility, emphasis on raw emotion, and distinct lack of subtlety, I would question that, but comics can be subtle. They thought this was the perfect medium to get out to people. And also, it has to be said, there was no censorship of comics, unlike the movie industry. So here we have a story which completely demonizes the German race. I mean, there is no such thing as a good German. This was done because at this stage of the war, in 1944 into 45, there was no chance of any kind of redeeming quality for anybody from the enemy sides, whether they were German or Japanese. They were irredeemably evil and violent. This whole material has been explored by Paul Hirsch, who is a remarkable researcher. I recommend this book you can see on the left because he has gone through boxes and boxes of archives where this material is hidden. There is no place you can just go to and find out about this stuff. It's buried. It's hidden for a reason, of course, because it's not really been exposed very much. He went through so much material to dig out these projects and find out about them. And these were not minor projects with a 1,000 or a few thousand. They would have 250,000, 500,000 copies produced. They'd be published in multiple languages. They were all part of the propaganda use of comics by the American government, which continued well into the 60s and 70s with the Cold War and with the Vietnam War. There were more positive uses of comics. Here's a very important, groundbreaking one from '57, which told the story of the Rosa Parks, as you may know, the famous protest on the buses of the city in Alabama that didn't allow black people onto the bus. And in this case, at the time, by this point, Martin Luther King was already on the gaining in attention, and this was part of a whole program of educational comics. It's the first real example of a comic book advocating for nonviolent protest and incorporating real, very immediate history to convey that you could make a difference to society. And yeah, as I said, more than 250,000 copies of this were actually printed, and it's been used to really push forward the civil rights movement. In fact, America, more than any other country, has produced more free educational, advertorial, and promotional comics than any country. They've used the comic book format so much, to the point where, in fact, Harry S. Truman had a comic as part of his presidential campaign. They've been used in other places as well, exactly for that kind of purpose, the political purpose of leaders seeking election. For example, here, this was the campaign in Indonesia when an important new president was elected, Joko Widodo, who did not come from any kind of elite, whether political or military, and was able to win a lot of popular votes, partly because his story was put across through a comics format. And more recently, of course, we've had thank goodness, the overturn of Bolsonaro in Brazil, and comics played their role there. His own party, Partido dos Trabalhadores, the Workers' Party, basically Labour Party, produced this comics version of his life and his policies, which helped undoubtedly to get him elected. I'm going to take you to India now, back to India. We looked at the Kavads. This is the founder of the graphic novel in India. There are other Indian comics before him, educational ones, which are very much more straight-laced, shall we say. This is a campaigning graphic novel from 1994 called River of Stories, which dealt with the catastrophic impact of a proposed dam being built in a part of India where the indigenous people's lifestyle and values and habitat would have just been completely wiped away in order to build this dam. And nobody had done this kind of work before, this kind of long-form and campaigning graphic novel. The drawing is really intense and powerful, and it had quite an impact at the time. The whole project became more in the news as a result of this graphic novel, and it dragged on. Sadly, the dam did get made. It couldn't stop it. It delayed it. The book has been reissued just recently, and this is these examples of it. And he paved the way and showed, this is like the mouse, if you like, of India. It showed that comics could be more engaged with society, could be used for protest and for politics, and has inspired many people to follow in his wake. including, this is one of his students, in fact, Agya Mana, who has made, for example, here he's explaining he's made these enormous comics to be displayed out on the street, also as a pamphlet to promote understanding of Indian history, and not just the official history, but the history that as it really happened. He's gone on to work with other Indian artists who collaborated on comics about the Bengalis' struggle for independence, and there's an example of that. But also, he worked here with a painter, Debkubar Mitra, on a project that was organized by the University of Exeter in the UK to reveal what famines really are about. That is much more than just a lack of food and water, for example, but actually there are all the politics and the cultural aspects that are often overlooked. And they produced new comics which were based on the research and the archives in various universities to explain why these things happen, the people pulling the strings, as you can see here in that panel on that page. And amongst them, they were revealing also how many of the documents at the time that were lost or buried were giving a true picture of the famine, in contrast with the reported version there you can see in the French and British press, which didn't record what was really happening on the ground. And that's an example of the academic world embracing comics. This is a thing that we can also think about. The academic community are always finding out about stuff, but nobody pays any... Who reads academic papers? Only academics. And academic books have tiny print runs, but comics can make this information accessible to everybody, and we can all learn so much more from what they've found out. And this is going on worldwide. There are all kinds of projects developing these links between academia and popularizing their findings through comics. This is just a little inset, just to show what do you do to explain what might happen in the event of an earthquake in Tokyo. As you may know, Japan has more earthquakes, well, certainly a lot more earthquakes than over here, I imagine, but it certainly has a lot of earthquakes, and people have earthquake training from school. But there's also a manga, not surprisingly, which tells you what to do. It's available if you want to read it online as well. And it does show some pretty shocking effects. So people are kind of prepared for the worst eventualities. There we go. Now, this is I'm jumping now back to the UK to show how the women's suffrage movement, you might be aware that Britain was fairly early, not the first, but fairly early in finally allowing women to vote. It took a long struggle, and as part of that, there was essentially non-violent, at least non-violent towards people, protests, but very, very severe clampdowns on the suffragettes. In this case, this is a cartoon from the Daily Mirror. Surprisingly, this was a newspaper aimed at women. That's why it was called the Daily Mirror. But in this cartoon, the cartoonist contrasts heroic women from the past and then the supposed heroines of today, where a woman is seen punching a policeman, setting fire to a house, or smashing windows. Obviously not very much in favor of women's suffrage and rights at all, even though it's a newspaper aimed at women. Whereas the actual suffragettes set up their own screen printing and print presses to produce posters and to get their messages out to the public. And this is a very clever one, contrasting the absurdity of the number of women who were not allowed the vote, whereas, as you can see, a convict, a lunatic, an owner of white slaves, someone unfit for military service, and even a drunkard, they would still be allowed to vote. That has a very, very striking effect as a comics poster. Dealing with racism in Britain, as you may know, during the 70s especially, there were race riots, there was the rise of the National Front, and to combat that, this comic book called Action Pact came up with a pair of teenagers, one black, one white, who become superheroes essentially, but are able to combat the curse of racism. But along the way, also impart some very useful information. This was something that I researched when I was doing an exhibition at the British Library. We also found that the National Front countered this information with handy tips for any racist rioters who might get into trouble with the police. This tells you, for example, do you have to go to the police station with the police? No, not if they just want to question you. In other words, very important, useful information for racists. And again, using the comic strip format. So if anything we'll come across from this talk, you'll realize that the medium is powerful for both good and for maybe not so good. When it comes to smoking, Superman was brought in here as part of the campaign in the UK to cut down on smoking. And the villain is called Nick O'Teen, which of course is a play on nicotine. It also suggests slightly that O'Teen would be an Irish name, which has a slightly dubious side of it. But some years later, I came across, there was a backlash somewhat against this anti-smoking campaign. People now, of course, know smoking is bad for you, and there are the labels all over it. So there was a brand of cigarettes in the UK, not going now, called Death cigarettes. Death cigarettes did their own comic book, and you could buy, their packets were black, they had skull and crossbones on, but also they even gave you a coffin-shaped pack, a larger pack of cigarettes. They were glorifying the fact that they were killing you. This is just showing, again, that both sides of the fence, in this case smoking, can adopt comics. So, okay, now we're going looking at some other obvious examples, but still interesting ones that we know comics have always played a political role, and Tintin from the beginning in its incarnation in a Catholic weekly newspaper for children was getting across all the messages that were in the adult part of the newspaper. And sending Tintin to the Soviet Union was, of course, not going to be, was for a propaganda purpose. Even showing here how he discovers that the chimneys with lots of smoke coming out of the factories is actually all a hoax, and all they're doing is putting straw. There's no real big industry and economy thriving in the Soviet Union. It's all a lie. Superman, of course, was recruited also for the war effort, but this is one that appeared in Life magazine, where Superman does the obvious thing. Rather than just hitting villains or punching out planes, he actually goes and grabs Hitler, and I think it's Mussolini, is it here? I think it is, yes, I think it is, and takes them to the League of Nations to stand trial. Is it Stalin? Oh, forgive me, I wasn't paying attention to who it was. You're right, it's Stalin, of course it is. There we go. Yes, it is, yes. And so here we are, Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin, we pronounce you guilty of modern history's greatest crime. And this was not well received by the Germans. We know that that upset Goebbels in particular as being very bad publicity. So that was the big job that Look magazine was in Look magazine in 1940. On the other hand, you've got comics like Terry and the Pirates, which is a very straight-laced, pro-military comic by Milton Caniff. This was actually, this particular episode was read into the Parliament, the Congress records, congressional records, for its message of why America is in the war. And clearly, again, Caniff was on message, was repeating what the government wanted him to say. But other war comics were more critical. During the Korean War, we have here the work of Harvey Kurtzman in Frontline Combat. This particular story, this is what he said in Iwo Jima in Japan. But the point is that he was definitely an anti-war artist, and would even do stories set during the Korean War, criticizing the war at the time as it was raging. It's hard to imagine many examples of that happening now, where people would really be, one would hope they might be happening to protest war. Kurtzman was Jewish, of course, as were a great many of the creators of these early comic books in America, as was Jack Kirby. He, unlike Kurtzman, as far as I can recall, Kirby did actually was in the D-Day landings in 1944. He was a infantryman. He was on the front lines. And about a decade or so later, he started this magazine where he was drawing on veterans' own memories of the event. As you can see here, that the letter just says, "Dear Mum, the war is like a picnic. Today we spent a day at the beach." But that's the beaches of Normandy. Very powerful image on the cover. And that's one of his short stories. This is, again, portrays a real experience of war, not the glamour of triumph and winning and invulnerability. When this comic came out in the 60s, America, of course, was already embroiled in the Vietnam War, and enormous tragedies were happening. Blazing Combat was a black and white, large format adult magazine, and it was distributed, like all comic books actually, to army bases in America. And when this comic came to light, the army banned the magazine from being available because, of course, it was questioning the Army's role, the American Army's role in Vietnam. And this was essentially caused the magazine eventually to close only after a few more issues. But this was an important, brave story to say this is, to have a viewpoint of a Vietnamese farmer expressed in a story published in America. It was not on message at all. And as reference here, just is to sort of bring in an example from the Vietnam War as well, these were women who fought alongside the Vietnamese against the American forces. And this is actually what's called a Lian Huan Hua, which is a one panel per page little mini comic you could fit, same size as your mobile phone, if actually. And these were printed in millions during the communist era under Mao, during the Cultural Revolution, to get positive messages out to the public, again, for propaganda purposes. Unlike that, you've got individual human experience recorded in comics, which nowhere else could really do as powerfully. And this is the experience of Nakazawa Keiji, who survived to live the story of being in the Hiroshima bombing in August 1945. It has some of the most harrowing images, I think, of all comics. And it has become it really was one of the very first manga to ever appear in English. The appearance of Barefoot Gen came out of a march across America for peace. And on that march, there were several peace protesters who had copies of this manga, not in English. And as they were showing it around to other people, they got together to form Project Gen and to get it into English. In other words, it came out of that protest march. In the UK, we had a very important graphic novel called When the Wind Blows, you might be aware, by Raymond Briggs. It was also animated, which dealt with the realities of nuclear war, and in particular, the ridiculous instructions that are given by our governments, or most governments, that suggest that you might be able to survive if you hide under the table or if you close the curtains or something like this. And it has this charming couple, elderly couple, who have survived World War II by believing in the government and following the propaganda, and therefore do the same thing, and not to spoil the story for you, but they do not survive. And it was a harrowing book, which was actually discussed in Parliament and created a lot of discussion during the times of the campaign for nuclear disarmament. And Briggs is one of our greatest comic artists. In terms of war generally, this is another important book because this is where the comics appear is important. This didn't appear in a fancy, expensive graphic novel. It appeared in a weekly, cheap boys' war comic where everything else was nothing but gung-ho, heroism, and violence. But Charlie's War dealt with the reality of war, of the First World War, I would point out, because the Second World War was still a bit too close to actually show the horrors of it, really. You wouldn't even know that there were concentration camps in British war comics. They don't get mentioned. But in the First World War, this is a young boy named Charlie who signs up too young, very patriotic, believes that the war's going to be over in a few months and he's going to come back a hero, and then he experiences all of the real horrors of the trenches, and in a very, very graphic form. And it's one of the most remarkable stories about the First World War. When it came out in French, it was hailed by Jacques Tardy, no less, who, as you may know, is one of the great artists of dealing with the First and Second World Wars. Now, back to Briggs. I want to read you, just show you a very short section from this book, but this is another remarkable book by Briggs, which has been forgotten, but in its moment, shortly after the Falklands War, which you may know was a ridiculous war that Britain and Margaret Thatcher led to conquer the Falklands, to reclaim them from Argentina. The war ended up with an enormous number of casualties and some deaths as well, but casualties where people lost their arms and legs. And these men, mostly, but they were women too, from the forces were not allowed to take part in the victory march which Margaret Thatcher organized when the forces came back to Britain. They weren't allowed to be seen because it would have given a bad impression. So we can control the story. So here, of course, Briggs exaggerates both the Argentine and British leaders, but he also then does this beautiful sensitive drawing in pencil. Some men were shot, some men were drowned, some men were burned alive, some men were blown to bits. Hundreds of brave men were killed, and they are all real men made of flesh and blood. They were not made of tin or of iron. And of course, it reads like a children's book, but it really is not. It's got a great power from its simplicity, I think. And we still have these appearing on our stands. These are old issues, but there's number 5,000 and number 6,000 has just come out. These comics are on the stands in Britain, and Britain continually winning World War II over and over again with no bloodshed, no concentration camps, and nothing uncomfortable, because war is quite good. And actually, why don't you join the army? Have you thought about doing that? So that's what they're doing. Another war, of course, and another cultural crisis became Persepolis, one of the most remarkable modern graphic novels by Marjane Satrapi. But this is a key page, as you may know, where Marjane meets her uncle, who entrusts a little bred dove that he's made from his meager rations in prison, and which inspires her that I've got to tell his story, which she does as an adult. And as you know, Winchlis, of course, worked with Satrapi on the animated film, which was non-digital. It was real, actual drawings. Another remarkable French graphic novel, again published again in English, is The Photographer. What happened here is that this journalist, Didier Lefebvre, was sent to Afghanistan with Médecins Sans Frontières, the Doctors Without Borders, to bring health care, but to record what they were doing for both sides of the war. And when he met the artist, the journalist, who'd taken hundreds of photographs, the journalist explained that really only one or two of the photographs had been used in the media at all, and he'd got the whole trip photographed. So Guibert, and his story was fascinating, because he went through all of his difficulties dealing with the situation, and what were we doing any good there? Could we really help the situation? So this is a unique combination of photography and drawing, where essentially Guibert took the actual contact sheets and used them as part of scenes that obviously were real and that Lefebvre had photographed. But of course, Lefebvre had not photographed himself. He hadn't photographed all the conversations and the stuff around it, the operations that were done by the doctors. So these were recreated by Guibert, drawing from Lefebvre's approach. So this hybrid approach remains, to me, still one of the best examples of how photography and drawing can be combined in comics. Okay, these two, I'm just showing to you because they're interesting, but on the left you have a propaganda comic from North Korea. We don't even know about North Korea very much, let alone their posters and graphics. There's an exhibition that was held a few years back in London, which revealed more. And I was able to find a researcher that's looking into all this, their own comics history, and their comics are very, very heavily propagandist, as you might imagine, and look like they've been drawn not in the 90s, but like in the 40s or 50s or something. On the right is a comic from Cambodia, autobiographical. It's about Prum Vanak, who, to make money for his wife who was pregnant and couldn't afford all the hospital treatment, he went onto a tuna fishing boat in Thailand, which never allowed him to escape. The boat never landed, never came near the coast, and he was essentially an enforced slave. And he does eventually escape, but it's a very tremendous piece of autobio. It also raises awareness of slavery still going on. Laura Krug is German-born, and she produced a book called Heimat, or Belonging, as it's also called in English, where she confronted and researched the real roles that her family played during the Second World War and working for the Nazis, essentially. And she has actually ignited quite a debate in Germany, because you may not be aware, but she explained to me that in Germany, a lot of this is taught, the history is taught, but not the family history. And many people know the history as a kind of, oh yes, that's the history. But what about your family? Did your family have any involvement? There's a great avoidance of that, as you might imagine, the skeletons literally in the cupboard, in the closet. And her book actually is full of archival content as well, as you can see here on the left. And she was unflinchingly honest about what her family did. And it sparked a lot of debate about how are we teaching this to the Holocaust, and how are we teaching the issues that it still has in our society if we don't talk and face up to the realities of what our own families and our own generations did. And so that's an important step I think, that comic has taken. A similar activity happening in the Czech Republic is a thing called Postbellum. You might have heard of this, where they are inviting people in I think it is anonymously, I think it is anonymously, to share their oral accounts of their roles during the history of the Czech Republic, and including, of course, under the communists, when they were collaborators, they're guilty of stuff. They want to get it off their chests. They haven't talked to anybody about it. So this audio archive has also been adapted into graphic novels. And here's an example by the brilliant Czech artist Toybox, one of several in this anthology. Okay, I'm going to have a drink of water briefly, but this is coming back to Britain with Clause 28, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It was another of Thatcher's wonderful achievements, to try and wipe out homosexuality by not teaching it in schools and not promoting it. And Alan Moore was so angry about this that he set up his own publishing company and produced this anthology called Artists Against Rampant Gay Homophobia, which brought together many British artists, and some American too, to protest it and have a big impact. And then I want to show you this work by Una. Una is an artist I met. There's an amazing movement that's going on in Britain in the last decade or so now. I think it must be getting on for a decade, called Ladies, L-A-Y-D-E-E-Z, Ladies. Not ladies, ladies. Ladies do comics. This is a community run by women, but not exclusively for women. Everyone's welcome along. And there I've met over the years some amazing artists who have come to comics and realized this is my medium. The comics message is the message, and so is the comics medium is the message. For them, it's the perfect way of combining what they do. Una was doing printmaking, but she had a story burning inside her from the 70s, growing up and being accused of being a slut, accused of being a tart, and of being, really being demeaned by men, all during the time when Britain was going through a phase you may not be aware of the Yorkshire Ripper. Not quite as terrible as Jack the Ripper, who you've all heard of, but still a horrendous serial killer of women, and particularly prostitutes, who had a mission to kill women because he saw them all as being tarts or sluts or whatever. And she draws these images that are so powerful. The one on the right there, when I first saw the image, I said, you've got to put this into your graphic novel. It's so dark and powerful, the way you've drawn, the way you feel dragged down by this weight. And similarly here, she draws the weight of criticism as a heavy speech balloon over her shoulder there, for example. And here, she talks about how the Madness song, you might know, what is it called again? What was the title of this one? I can't remember. Anyway, how at school, basically, they used a song by Madness. What is that song called? Embarrassment. Yes, Embarrassment by Madness, if you don't know the song. Yeah, anyway, the lyrics were used to criticize her. So even when how that song was subverted and used to criticize her. So she's been very honest, and this book has gone into many languages and has had a big impact on how women will be empowered and can empower themselves through comics. This is one of the most interesting comics that's come out of India in the recent years. Bimayana is based on Ramayana and Ambedkar, who is the co-founder of the Constitution in India and was an important leader alongside Gandhi, not so well known as Gandhi, and who was also an untouchable. As you may know, the Dalits are untouchables. They are still in our world now. India still is caste-ridden, and they are not even in the caste. They're the very, very bottom. They are almost below dogs. They are not to be touched. They are the people that are not human. It's unbelievable. But this example of Ambedkar was that he was able to rise up and become a lawyer and have a big impact on society. And these two artists, they are Durgabai Vyam and Subhash Vyam, brought in a whole new approach to comics, which I've never seen before. And this is the great strength of this medium, is there are no rules. Anyone telling you, draw this way, anyone telling you, this is how underground comics look, or superhero comics look, or any kind of genres or sections of comics, do it your way. I made up a word actually just recently, not individuality, indivisuality. Be visually individual. Find your path, because nobody else can do what you can do and tell what you tell. So when they were shown, these two artists were shown great comics like Mouse and Persepolis and said, here you are, this is how comics work, but why don't you do them? So, we don't want to put our characters inside all these boxes. They were used to living outdoors or in villages. But what they said, if we're going to divide the page, we're going to use our own design of borders. So for the borders, They're actually called Durga, I think, yes, and they are kind of clay decorative friezes, little kind of edges that are put onto the bottom of their homes, and they change according to the season, and they use them to divide it up. They also came up with a completely new system of using the balloons. So if I use this thing here, maybe I can do it. I can just show you here very easily, maybe. Let me try and do it. Hang on a minute. Is it going to play? Oh, there it is, there. Right, so let me have a look here. What have we got? Well, here, for example, that's an eye. You can see an eyeball. Sorry, I'm looking this wrong. I can't do this. I have to do a contortion here. Right, well, that's an eyeball. I'll shout. Oh, where is it? There it is. There, did you see it? Just a minute. Where is it? Where's it gone? There we are. Sorry, there it is. That's the thought. You know, it's the thought balloon, but also they show the mind's eye inside the thought balloon. And they have the regular balloons are drawn like birds. And then here, this thing here, what do you think that is? Look at this, coming off the end of this speech balloon. It's a scorpion's tail, because it shows that you're saying something horrible and negative about the untouchables. And you go, of course. And you go, yeah, they have scorpions, and they have scorpions. And so that, to me, is somebody saying the medium is still flexible. We can make it, and we can make it our own. Very exciting. Okay, these are the much more conventional American-influenced educational comics from India, still being produced. There are also some great comic strips appearing in newspapers. This is a slightly older one by Manjula Padmanabhan, and another more recent one, which is very funny, about apocalyptic scenarios of moral decline with women showing bra straps, or perish the thought talking to a boy. And Vishwa Jyoti Ghosh has done a very tremendous work of revisiting the emergency of 1975 under Indira Gandhi and exposing what really happened during that time. So there's a lot happening in Indian comics to address political issues and marginalized peoples. Speaking of marginalized, the Uyghurs in China were the subject of an important graphic novel, actually a digital comic, which won a Pulitzer Prize. This is a revised Pulitzer Prize, because they weren't quite sure what category quite to put it in, and they had to kind of change the category to cover, what is the prize now? I think it's for, here we are, illustrated reporting and commentary, which is their new term for cartooning. As you might be aware, parallel to this, a lot of American newspapers and other countries too, but in America, have dropped their editorial cartoons. New York Times just found that how do we do this? We have to be so sensitive now. We can't be political. So they have dropped the political cartoons from their papers. But what has replaced it somewhat have been webtoons and online comics, where there's more possibility of exploring this. So here, this artist, Famida Azim, who's originally from Bangladesh, now living in Seattle, produced this comic, illustrated it based on memories of somebody who was able to escape from a Chinese internment camp for Uyghur people, who, as you may know, are Muslim in China. And this is something, in other words, which is first-hand from a particular survivor's memories. And a sequence here. I was born, how are we doing? We're over time anyway. I was born June 16, 1982 in Urumqi, East Turkestan, part of China. My husband and I weren't rich, but we were happy. We loved to travel. I liked, with our family, I liked how free the places were. In Urumqi, things were never great. Then it got worse. I won't read all this out, but you can see here that her husband is taken away for questioning, and they end up. People would be seized if authorities found anything representing Islam in their homes. So people threw out their stuff. The sewers were lined with their copies of the Quran and other objects. And on the webcomic, this sewer goes on for quite a long time. I think that's a very good, powerful use of the webtoon. I'm jumping now to the coronavirus. You may not realize, but very soon after the outbreak in Wuhan, cartoonists, some of them in Wuhan, were already sharing online comics about the experience. One of them I am not showing to you now, also explaining that Wuhan is a nice place and it's got rich culture, and please don't demonize us just because it happened to have started in Wuhan. And there was an anthology produced of these online comics, First Wave, which I recommend very highly. Here's a brief one I'm going to take you through by Tian Ke. It's day 10 of self-isolation. I'm too anxious to contact friends in Wuhan. My friends working in media are wildly busy, but most people are staying at home like me. There are arguments on the internet, but much of it is actually self-explanatory. If you can't get rid of the problem, it's pointless to get rid of the person who alerted you to it. The people of Wuhan are not to blame. Anyone could be in their situation. Citizens have the right to raise questions, even if they might sometimes make mistakes. The government should serve the people. We are citizens, not fans. We don't need to cheer all day. That's just a fact, like rocks are hard, water is wet, objects fall towards the center of the earth. If you still need this explained to you, somebody should feel ashamed. Great stuff, great stuff. Okay, now I'm taking you off somewhere else. But anyway, this is the work of Zehra Dogan, who is Kurdish, but she had a Turkish passport. She was arrested and imprisoned because of posting news and images on Twitter about injustices against her people, the Kurds in Turkey. As you know, Turkey has got a very repressive regime, as have many countries at the moment, or terrible leaders as well. She ended up getting sentenced to 2 years, 9 months, 22 days in a terrible prison in Turkish Kurdistan. And this is what she produced. You can see here some of the letters she was able to send out about her experience. She wanted it to be recorded, to not just disappear. And she bravely did this during the time of her captivity. And as I explained here, she only had one big biro type of pen. She had to use bits of paper wherever she'd been sure she could use. It's mentioned that she even used her own and her companion's menstrual blood as part of the drawing ink, so that gives it an even more shocking effect. I don't know whether that's the case here in these images in red, but I think it might be the images in black here. When she came out of captivity, she was able to expand on this story and produce some extraordinary, fantastic imagery that was then exhibited in Milan in other art galleries. And it was published as a book, and it's available in French and Italian so far, but I think it's a very important story. And I love the way that she's also been able to bring it into the art gallery world as well. There's the displays of that. Okay, I will wrap up, but this is a burning story, 2 burning stories to finish with, as in news stories. You may know about the El Eternauta. I'm going to have a drink of water quickly, just a minute. Right, so this was a sci-fi comic, which basically is like any other sci-fi comic. It's got aliens, it's got monsters. The arrival of the aliens is triggered by deadly snow that will kill you. So the resistance, the people resisting the aliens, they have to wear these like scuba diving type suits to keep out the deadly snow. And but it became in Argentina, which as you know, in later years suffered terrible military dictatorships and repression. It had a whole extra echo of meaning and relevance. It became an allegory for not only for what could happen if we were invaded, but also for resistance. It was very much an inspiring image. And the character, the author of the story, Hector Hermann Oesterheld, was disappeared by the military junta, as were other members of his family. But the character has lived on in society as a symbol of protest. The Eternauta, or the Eternaut, it's a combination of astronaut and eternity, so it's a voyager through time, essentially. It explains the character. And it still appears in street art. And when I was in Buenos Aires in 2015, there was the most amazing exhibition, I'll run through this, but called Traces of the Invasion, which didn't mention anything about the comic at all until the very end, which you could easily have missed. And I was convinced at least some people thought this, oh yes, I mean, my grandma told me about this invasion. It definitely happened in 57, I remember it, because there was very convincing documentary material. They had a film clip. They had actual reconstructions of locations. They had an archivist explaining the evidence they'd found, costumes and models and things. It was the most brilliant exhibition. And the character lives on powerfully. Even recently, as you may know, Nestor Kirchner, the president, his face was put into the costume as part of his sort of campaigning and raising awareness of the left-wing Peronist group. And then currently, Netflix, who of course are currently adapting almost any comic that they can because of the writers and actors strike. Where do we get material from? We'll use comics, I suppose. Anyway, but they're doing this. It might be good. It might be very good, but it's what's interesting. This is too much for you to read, but you're going to look at this online and you can read it all. But The Guardian reported about the wonderful current running mates top left there, you can see who are going to be potentially the next leaders of Argentina. Don't they inspire confidence? They really do. And they are rewriting history. As we know, history is not fixed. So here, now, they can rewrite the history of the military dictatorships and to say that the resistors, the people that were disappeared, were actually terrorists, and they killed people, and they're making up all sorts of statistics, and how actually it was a golden age, and let's bring it back again, kind of thing. And these people should not be honored as the heroes that they were. Okay, climate change. This is enough, of course, for a much longer talk. But I want to show you about this book from the UK, which brought together some very important UK celebrities and artists. The most important comic book on Earth. That doesn't mean it means about the Earth. The most important comic book about the Earth. And amongst the artists and features, there was this very dark, sinister version of Pogo, who becomes Oh No, and the famous motto by Walt Kelly is, "We have met the enemy and he is us," changes to, "We have met the enemy and they is you." So it's basically, we've caused the extinction of these animals from the Pogo Okefenokee swamp from this comic strip. And briefly here, I'm sorry, there's more text than I can read out, but this raised a lot of money, $2 million. It also helped set up a national park in Guatemala, and they also made a point of trying to make the printed book as sustainable as possible, because we know printing itself is a challenging thing. You can use recycled paper, you can also use vegetable inks, etc., vegetable oils for the ink. So they made it as green as possible. I'm going to jump ahead here, because this is the important thing I want to get to. This is a current project called From Ink to Action. You can see here some of the artists from Egypt, but also other Arabic countries. Egypt was the host of the previous COP summit. As you may know, you might use this perhaps here in Slovenia, but the word COP is also called by many people in the UK cop out. You know, the phrase to cop out is to not do anything, basically. But we hope maybe COP28 will make a difference. It's coming up in Dubai. These comics were commissioned by the British Council for that very conference in Dubai. This is the artist I met this weekend from Egypt with her graphic novel short story about climate activism. You can read all the stories here. They're very, very good. They're also on display all around the city, so they're really visible and accessible. They're not locked away in a book. They're out there on the street, in window displays, and in public spaces. And they're going to be shown in Dubai. So this is a quote from Alan Moore, which kind of ends my talk, I think it does, which is, "There has never been a generation for whom comics as a tool or an effective weapon are more eminently suited. Times like these are arguably exactly those which comics were created to engage with." That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. No, you can stay. That was perfect.
Question one, what was the name of the artist? No, it wasn't.
There we go. We have some time for questions, actually, so please raise your hand if you have a particular question. First, here's one first question. Yes.
Hello, thank you for a great lecture. I was wondering, maybe you noticed some comics on Brexit.
Well, not very many that I can think of. We had, of course, a barrage of misinformation from the pro-Brexit lobby during the campaign, but I don't think even they used. I'm not aware of many of them, and I think this is some satirical cartoon things produced on. I went on some of the protest marches about Brexit, so some of the things there were done. But it was not a medium that was very engaged, unfortunately. And I'm still hoping that we will get to some stage where we will have Britain. Have you heard that word? Maybe it's a new word you haven't heard. It's not been talked about very much, but I think after Brexit comes Britain. Let's hope. And maybe then we'll use some comics.
Bravo. Some more questions. Please raise your hand. Okay, I have a question myself, actually, because what I really liked about your presentation is that it also shows comics from all over the world, but also in different formats. I saw like elements that are 3D. I saw also like, for example, the Indian comic where they want to get out of the frame. So there's lots of different ways to to escape the conventional
absolutely.
comics.
Yeah.
And in your research, is there a particular type of comics, like a non-conventional type of comics? It can even be like street art comics.
Yeah.
That you think is which works best in order to get across a message.
Yeah, that is one of the big questions, because we're in an era now where most of you have got smartphones, and you're probably wondering, I'm missing something at the moment. And the smartphone is undoubtedly the way we can reach the most people, but how much attention do those people give? Because there's so much swiping going on where an image is barely under your eyes for more than a second. And so I'm much keener on stuff that is able to be out in the community. It can be on an exhibition for free. It can be out on the street. It could be street art, as you might mention. Someone I didn't mention, but I met an artist when I was in Sao Paulo called Tito Narua. I'm probably not pronouncing it properly. Brazilian, of course, who does enormous scale comics. And they're not just in one site. He will actually tell a story. He was based in Sao Paulo, I think it was, and in Rio, when Rio hosted the Olympics. And they are stories you can follow around the city. So you go from one wall or one site of the street art to another, and it unfolds into a story. It's then actually put together into a book, but it also is out there on the street, and that's a tremendous system. But my main concern about the smartphone era that we're in is that you may recall, I don't know, but Scott McCloud, the great theorist who wrote Understanding Comics, was talking about the infinite canvas of the web. And you might recall that the internet does, in theory, allow you to go beyond the screen that you're immediately looking at. You could actually imagine it being a porthole into an even bigger world, and that you could read stories and look at images in all kinds of directions and configurations. There's a form of comics called hypercomics, which are, I think, something that's still underdeveloped, where it isn't just A to Z. It isn't just linear, panel 1, panel 2, panel 3, but you have perhaps a core story, and then another story can come off it, another story can come off it, or you can have the same scene told from 4 different characters' perspectives. You can have characters in a house or a flat, whatever, and they are moving through a story visually and also physically. These kind of things have been happening. Because at the moment, what we have with the webtoon is not the infinite canvas. With the web comics that are completely vertical scrolling, we have a kind of strange drip feed where every panel that comes up is a potential surprise because you can't see it ahead. And as soon as it's gone, it's forgotten. And I don't think anybody is going... Does anybody go back and have a look at, I missed something? Whereas, the power of print comics or even web comics in their richest form is that you can explore a bit. You're not just snacking constantly. It's not the endless power of the next. You can stop. And we know that is one of those great strengths of comics, which has been eroded by the webtoon. It brings some advantages of delivery, clearly, but it also has limited us. So I'm still hoping that we're going to see at some point some breakout webtoon, and there are ones coming out of Japan now which are starting to go, okay, we're going to actually start to use horizontal scrolling where people can actually realize they could actually stop for a moment and see all 360 degrees of this room where the character is, and then come back to that same image, and you could sort of get a sense of where you are. But for the moment, that's the dictatorship of how the market has developed with smartphones. This is for reading and scrolling quickly. That's for looking at videos or at whatever movies. But that delivery system is vital. But as you say, getting it out into unusual places and everyday spaces is important to reach people. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. What next, maybe you think? I think you may be very thirsty for comics after this lecture, but there's also like real drinks and food. There's a huge ham or prosciutto from Slovenian specialty.
Thank you very much for the pig.
That may be interesting to you as well. Just a brief note, there is the exhibition also of the results, the output of the workshops that have been organized by our colleague from Stripburger, David Kranchan. There's not much time now to talk about it, but he's the one that can explain more about the workshops with the elderly people and the younger people. So you can also have an informal talk with him about the exhibition. The other exhibition is partly like a sneak preview of the work that you will learn more about in the days to come during the second and the third day of the Remix Comix conference. First of all, I want to once again thank Paul Gravett for his wonderful lecture.
Thank you for inviting me.